Welcome. It is the final day of the National Consultation on Education 2021-2022 Education Passport to the Future. I'm DK Rostar, and this evening we are discussing enabling student success. In light of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on exacerbating existing challenges of student underachievement, there is need to conduct a systemic review of the provision of education to students in order to identify the cause or causes of decreasing student academic performance in the midst of the implementation of a wide range of intervention strategies. The provision of a suitable education system for 21st century students requires the right mix of people, plant, and process in the provision of sound educational opportunities. To help guide our discussion this evening, we are joined by Mary Bastian, a guidance officer, social work educator, researcher, and disability rights advocate. With over 20 years' experience working within the education system, Ms. Bastian has a keen interest in issues of diversity, anti-oppressive practice, and social justice leadership. She is committed to using her knowledge and skills to work towards creating a world where persons of all abilities can attain their fullest potential. We also have Dr. Paulson Skerritt, a reading specialist who also engages learners with dyslexia, autism, deafness, and struggling readers. He has taught in special education teacher preparation programs at the University of Tennessee and here at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Currently, he lectures at the School of Education, the University of the West Indies, serves on the operating committee of the Psychoeducational Diagnostic and Intervention Clinic, or PEDIC, and the PEDIC Reading Clinic, and he is the current chair of the St. Augustine Campus Community Engagement and Service Learning Advisory Committee. As always, we ask you to leave your comment or questions on social platforms. Call us live at 622-4010, WhatsApp us at 776-0440, and most importantly, please visit the ministry's website at moe.gov.tt to make your contribution to the consultation. Now on to the important matter of enabling student success. And I want to thank you both for being here, Ms. Bastian and Dr. Skerritt. And let's start from the ground up. Define student success from where you sit, please.
Sure. So in my estimation, student success is in fact a layered issue. And because it is layered, I believe that it is a feature of, first of all, the potential of any student, coupled with their own access to quality education, throwing in their socio-cultural and socio-economic realities, all pulled together to be able to allow them to attain to their fullest potential.
All right, thank you so much. And I ask you for yours, Dr. Skerritt.
Yeah, for me, the purpose of real education has to be twofold. One, students need to be prepared to be able to make a living, so the economic factor, but they also need to be able to live. So student success has to be defined by your acquiring all those skills and knowledge that allow you to be able to make a living, but just as important, being able to live in a community, contribute to our solving some of the wicked problems that we seem not to be able to solve thus far.
And I want to ask, through this out to either of you, possibly one and then one, what is the importance of teaching students to dream now and see more, because you spoke about potential, Ms. Bastian, but see more than is there, as opposed to just saying, okay, well, these are the things that I see, so I have to fit myself in, I have to conform to what is there, as opposed to saying, okay, well, what can be?
Yeah, dreaming is so important, and it is the role of a part of the unit that exists under the Student Support Services Division. So as guidance officers, we promote that dreaming through a developmental approach to career development, and it is a source of motivation for our students as well, so that they know that no matter what their current reality is, through their ability to dream beyond what they see in front of them, through accessing education and all the opportunities available through the education system, they can get to that better place for themselves and for generations to come.
Dr. Skerritt, how do you dream past where you are when you have lessons plans and curriculum and all these things that are right in front of you?
Yeah, well, it's getting, the goal is to get students to think creatively We're living in a world now, there's an ancient guidebook that says the scene of this world is changing. And before, changes were not that dramatic, but now the changes are as fast as it takes an assassin's bullet to get to its target. So if we don't start dreaming, we're not going to be flexible enough to adapt to those changes, and we'll end up either getting stuck in a routine or be left behind. So that's a critical factor, getting students to think creatively, see things differently, and not get stuck in the way we have learned and performed in the past.
Who are the stakeholders that we're dealing with in terms of saying, okay, well, to get onto the pathway to successful students? Because when I asked each of you before we started, your constituency, as it were, I realized it was a lot more expansive than originally I thought. So you're dealing with more than students, you're dealing with more than students. Who are some of these people that play this key role or key roles in towards fostering creatives or successful students, Dr. Skerritt?
Well, I think throughout the consultations, there's been a thread going through that it's not just the teachers, it's not just the administration, the Ministry of Education, but it's the students, it's the parents, it's the community. And I appreciate that, and COVID-19 has taught us that, for example, parents now have a very pivotal role, and the relationship between the school and parents needs to change. In the past, we might have felt that parents, your business is to just bring the child to us, but that simply cannot be. The empowering of parents is very important to ensure that they can support their students' learning. So it's really all of those parties that we've been talking about collaboration going on.
And in terms of that collaboration, February 2, we would have celebrated World Read Aloud Day. And that showed the importance of partnership and having different people come together for a common goal. And I want you to take me through that a little bit, please, because in some of those points that I would have heard you raise, I think they're applicable to what it is we're dealing with now.
Yes, so one of the greatest gifts we could give children is the gift of language. And parents, they start playing a critical role in that. But it's not just parents, relatives, others who would get involved in reading for children. And reading aloud for children is shown to be a strong predictor in students becoming successful readers, appreciating the role of oral language and how it works toward developing our ability to read print. But of course, teachers, members of the community with World Read Aloud Day, we're finding that people are really becoming involved in reading aloud. It was so nice to see the Minister of Education reading and the Chief Officer, Secretary in Tobago. But that has to be something that we're all doing because reading aloud gets students to dream, gives an opportunity to visualize and then themselves verbalize what they're reading and make better sense of what they're reading. And the kind of dialectic reasoning that can go on, the kind of discourse you can have when you read aloud to children, that's when you get those soft skills, those 21st century skills we're talking about, critical thinking, being able to think differently, question things. All of those things can happen during read aloud sessions. That is just amazing.
One of the things I look at is nuance. So someone who understands a passage and is able to share that with someone who doesn't, so, something like the thing like really. No, really in a book, black and white, really is really, as opposed to really or really. And so understanding that, and especially since we have different ways of engaging each other right now remotely via the technology. But I like what you say, Dr. Skerritt, in terms of the gift of language. And looking from where you sit as the point of someone who advocates for inclusivity with people who may be in different positions, Ms. Bastian, what does the gift of language do for someone who has a disability, for someone who may be considered less than by other people who do not know that person's spirit, that person's character? What does the gift of language do when we have a positive narrative instead of just saying, you're not going to make it because you're not able to do the things that most of these people around you can?
Yeah, I think I would answer that in a twofold kind of way. When I think of language, I think of us seeing all students as literate beings, first of all, and even the profoundly disabled child who may be nonverbal. To recognize, I'm not a reading specialist, but to recognize that they too are literate beings, maybe at the point of just gestures, but they are communicating. and to recognize that and to create the space for their voice, quote unquote, to be heard. And that is important across the education system, which brings me to the second point about language and the importance of, beyond the language itself and the technical natures therein, to allow students to have a voice within the education system, within the classroom, to speak their truth. And it's only when they speak their truth, then we can understand their context and thereby organize our interventions or the curriculum delivery, differentiate our lessons, etc., to meet them where they are at. So language is critical in all aspects of that concept.
And I see you nodding, Dr. Skerritt. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as you know, I work with the deaf, and that has been a pet peeve of mine. For deaf children, the gift of language is particularly important for them because most deaf children are born in homes where their parents are not deaf. That means they're not exposed to a native sign language in the home. And oftentimes when they come into the school, for them to succeed, they need to have, for example, teachers who can sign. They need to have qualified interpreters who can communicate with them well. But very importantly, their parents need to learn to sign because that exposure, that immersion in that language is what is going to allow them to have a first language. And now there are many things about that first language they can transfer to learning to read and write in a second language. And then you talked about the issue. We live in Trinidad and Tobago where we speak our Trinidad English Creole, a beautiful, fully developed, complex language. Oftentimes our students are seen as not successful because they speak the Creole. And sometimes because we don't understand how the Creole works and how we can help students to develop, look, you need to learn to speak, read and write in standard English. But you have a beautiful language, respect it. How can I help you to develop what is called metalinguistic awareness? That ability, I understand this is my language, I speak it, but I need to read and write differently because the language of text, the language of education is the standard English. And teachers need to appreciate that they need to respect the language of our Creole speaking students in school, and to make sure that they succeed, they need to help them be able to go back and forth and to use the affordances of that first language to become proficient in speaking, reading and writing in English.
And I like the way you talk about being proficient and then also understanding context. So in this space, for this sort of implementation, this is the type that I would need to use. Because sometimes you have someone who, they're thrust into a position, they're thrust into a situation, and they say, okay, well, I need to speak properly. So you have somebody, I remember there was a bit of conflict with their supervisor, and they say, no, sir, I was here at 5 o'clock on the dirt, because that is what people, them trainers go and play in, this kind of way. So in terms of understanding context and then being comfortable within yourself that you're able to move from one to the other. What did you call it, Dr. Skerritt?
Metalinguistic awareness.
Look at thing. But fostering that kind of, and I used the term yesterday, fertile soil, to have this successful student be developed. I like the fact that you spoke about creating environments that allow for immersion. And once again, I want to get to the household, and as the guidance officer, what are some of the ways that you try to change mindsets, hearts, minds within the home so that you can actually have some of this done? But I'll ask you that question. We do it after the break. Stay with us. We return with more.
Has changed, and with every day, our children's future takes on a different shape. How do we prepare them for a future that is uncertain? One where their education, in whatever form it takes, is their only passport for the future. This is the focus of the National Education Policy for the period 2022 to 2027. We all have a stake in our children's tomorrow, so we must all have a voice today. The Ministry of Education began this conversation with the nation in November 2020, when we said it takes a village. We listened to you, the members of the village, and drafted 8 areas of focus for education for the next 5 years. These are TVET revitalization, curriculum reform, digital transformation, Education Act, equity in quality education, transition of learners, enabling student success, and human resource development. We then continued the conversation in December 2021. We consulted with key stakeholders in the education ecosystem, including the Representative Union for Teachers, parent groups, school boards, and tertiary level institutions. Having received and incorporated their recommendations, the Ministry of Education is coming back to the national population for their views and opinions on the draft concept note for the National Policy on Education 2022 to 2027. This is your opportunity to join the conversation. Let your voice be heard. There are 4 ways for you to comment. Visit moe.gov.tt for the draft concept note. Then you can share your views on moe.gov.tt. Call in during the televised broadcast. WhatsApp your views to 776-0440 or comment on the Ministry's social media pages during the live stream. Visit the Ministry of Education social media pages for further details. Education is a passport for the future, and share your views and help our children take flight.
The following feature on TNT Icons in Science is brought to you by Nehurst. Which TNT aeronautical engineer and inventor designed military aircraft that gave the Allied forces air superiority in World War II? Conrad Lowe, who attended Queen's Royal College and later MIT, was the lead designer of the famous fighter planes, the F-4U Corsair, the F-7U Cutlass, and the F-8U Crusader. To learn more on Conrad Lowe and other local icons, log on to www.nehurst.gov.tt.
Welcome back. We are discussing enabling student success, and right now, with the student in mind, there's a question coming in via WhatsApp. As a parent of a child with autism, my experience is that my child learns faster through songs. Do you think our education system is exploring this type of medium for learning? And I'm wondering who will take that one.
Yeah, well, definitely. In fact, more and more in recent times, VAPA, we've come to appreciate the role of VAPA in learning. And I think, like, for example, at the University of West Indies now, at the School of Education, there's a big emphasis on preparing students in the area of VAPA. But all teachers, even though those secondary school teachers would specialize in the VAPA areas, I know that in the primary school system, part of the training is that all primary school teachers are supposed to take courses in the use of song, drama, physical education, and not just see those things in silo, but how they support the learning of students. So the parent is absolutely right, and teachers need to be very conscientious in their unit plans and lesson design, that they find ways to infuse and use the affordances of all of those areas to support the teaching and learning in the classroom.
I remember, and this takes me back to primary school, we would huddle around and there was a radio program that would come on, and I still remember them talking about carbohydrates, and there's a song that rice and roti will make you go, but let's not go quite there. But in terms of developing that fertile soil with the students in mind, but dealing with parents and changing their mindset of how they deal with that student, that learner, what are some of the things that you go about doing, Ms. Bastian?
It begins with the messaging. And at Student Support Services Division, we keep away from blaming parents. I think it's so important to recognize that for the most part, parents are trying their best, they are doing their best. And so at the Ministry of Education, the guidance officers together with the school social workers consistently develop programs, both in response to issues as we see them coming up, to support parents with the developmental challenges that their children may go through, challenges that they have on a day-to-day, but also we anticipate some of the issues that may come up throughout the life cycle of a child, from childhood into adolescence. And we develop preventative programs as well, and we reach out to parents, and now it's even better because we have the virtual space. So we've been having a lot of parent workshops, etc., and even reaching out within the community context to empower our parents, so that they have the tools that are necessary to support their children towards attaining success.
Are there common factors or trends or traits you see someone reaching out to you as a guidance officer or someone reaching out to you as PEDIC wanting to do the best for their child? What are some of those things that they're almost the hallmark or traits of some of these people?
Yeah, well, for parents, remember we have a range of parents as well. So we have some parents who may themselves not had the best experience within the education system. And so they really don't know what the starting point is to help their child navigate the system and get the best results. So many parents reach out to us in that way. So it's not really a problem that they have encountered with their child as yet, but they want to know how to move forward to get the best for their child, the best opportunities. And then, of course, we have a number of parents who reach out to us when their students are exhibiting behavioral challenges. And so at SSSD, we have psychologists, the guidance officers, the school social workers, working together in a multi-tiered system to offer different levels of intervention to support both the child and to equip the parent with the strategies that they can use in tandem with the professionals to get the best results.
Thank you so much. And people going, we supposed to be bright, bright, bright. Will I look like as though I'm less than if I come to seek help? What are some of those things that people have to basically kind of battle with to get to the system, well, to get to you?
Well, first of all, you mentioned PEDIC, so you might be wondering what that is. So PEDIC is a psychoeducational diagnostic and intervention clinic that we have. And many parents who realize that their students are struggling, they can walk in and request a psycho evaluation where we have trained, very qualified, some of the best clinical psychologists who will provide them with an assessment and diagnosis of the challenges their students, the children might be having. There's also a referral system so that teachers who may be faced in the classroom and noticing that these students are struggling, they can use the referral system. They may send that to student support services, or they might advise a parent to seek the services of PEDIC. But many parents are interested. They want to know, what can I do to help my child? And so they reach out to us. And it's not a label of failure, because there's so many things that intersect to create challenges for learners. And it's only when you find out from a thorough assessment and diagnosis, what are these intersecting influences, and you can identify them and then move now to have an intervention plan that will address those needs.
It's almost as though you're approaching it from an area where you allow yourself to be vulnerable, knowing that you don't know everything, and that leads to strength at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
But looking at pros and cons, though, of a student intervention and achievement policy, this would be one aimed at supporting learners at risk of underachievement or identified as underachieving. What are some of those things that come to the fore when you think of work towards that end?
Two things. First of all, having a clear definition as to when we say underachievement or students underachieving, what does that look like? Important because for me, underachievement or a student underachieving, we have to remember that's a behavior. And many times it's specific to particular areas and not overall to all the academic areas or cognitive areas of this child's development. And to be able to identify that, we must have the data so that when we look at policy, as we develop and design these policies, we have to be clear as to how are we setting indicators for these words that we use, success, achievement, etc., and then set up monitoring and evaluation systems that work and that we can commit to consistently so that we can track students' performance, success, what is not working over time. That must be built into the policy together with all other recommendations. Otherwise, we will try different things in an ad hoc way and find that we're not moving the way we want to move.
And with that, I want to ask you, Dr. Scarrett, one of the things that we should we consider while looking at achieving, underachieving, some of those soft skills that you would have spoken about a little earlier, because some might posit that being able to come out of the experience of the pandemic with a healthy mindset should count for something, even though you may not have grasped as much of the concepts or content as you would like to in the education system because of the sheer vastness of this disruption.
So one can never discredit that we have to learn the skills, we have to acquire the knowledge, because if I don't know, then I'm stuck. But at the same time, I can know a lot and I can have all the skills, but if those soft skills, if I'm my intrapersonal skills, interpersonal skills, my ability to think critically and analyze things, like, you know, this all the challenges we had with vaccination and all those other things, if I'm not succeeding with that, then I'm still going to be a failure. And just to add to the point that Bastian was making, we need to have a policy, because there are different orientations people can take toward intervention. So, for example, a lot of times with regard to intervention, people use the itinerant model. It's very popular in deaf education. When I taught in the United States, so we had the itinerant deaf teacher. But I think in Trinidad and Tobago, in our context, that model, I'm going to say this carefully, is not working. And it's frustrating the very skilled and competent people who are trying to provide this service. It's affecting their self-efficacy, and it's not delivering to our students what they need. So any model that's going to work, the policy has to drive that providing the school with the support that they need. And in many of those other systems that we tend to want to compare to Trinidad, what obtains is that they have the same sets of problems we have, but the school provides that compensation. When things are missing, low SES, issues in the family, issues in society, the school compensates for it. So the support system, the policy has to drive that support is provided at the school. Give the school the resources they need, all the special educators, guidance counselors, social worker, so that we can have the students succeed.
So I get it from both of you that such a policy is needed. We're going to look at what a policy might look like when we return from this break. Stay with us. We come back with more.
The following feature on TNT Icons in Science is brought to you by Nehurst, who is Trinidad and Tobago's first and only female aerospace engineer to work at NASA. Dr. Camille Waldrop Allen is Trinbago's first and only female aerospace engineer to work at NASA and is currently assistant program scientist with the International Space Station. To learn more on Dr. Waldrop Allen and other icons, log on to www.nehurst.gov.tt.
The turning of the sod for the construction of these two buildings occurred at the 60th anniversary of Hillview College, and on August 12, 2020, it was completed. The buildings will be used for the sixth form students as well as counseling area, which we know is quite needed right now in our schools. It will also serve as a teacher and teaching and learning resource center and a lecture theatre. I know that the principal, students and staff are looking forward to the use of the buildings whenever some sort of normalcy in children attending schools will return.
On behalf of the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago and the Presbyterian Primary Schools Board of Education, I thank the government and the Ministry of Education for the completion of the rebuilding of this school. The project started about 7 years ago, and despite many challenges along the way, it has come to fruition. It has been a stressful time for the principal and staff, parents and students, during which they endured a fire that destroyed the administrative block, and classes were held in termite-ridden and less than acceptable classroom. The school's enrollment also dropped from 475 at the time when reconstruction started to 315 today. Today, therefore, it is with grateful hearts we give thanks that their dreams have been fulfilled.
As a former teacher and educator, I can relate, understand, and appreciate the excitement and anticipation of new and improved facilities. St. Augustine Girls High School is a hallmark of academic excellence, and the last 70 years have proven this.
I want to mention the role of the government in apportioning funding for education. I think it is extremely important to recognize that these are difficult times, and for funding to be able to be applied to these projects, it means that it is definitely a priority. This commissioning is very timely, and we've been at this for the last 2 weeks, doing 8 schools. Some new constructions, some like Hillview today, significant portions of the school have been added. All of us, therefore, have a vested interest in ensuring that the educational continuity for our children is maintained.
This was a production of Government Communications.
Welcome back to the National Consultation on Education. We are looking at enabling student success. We're doing this with Dr. Paulson Skerritt and Ms. Mary Bastian. Reminding you can be part of the conversation. Call us live at 622-4010. Send us a WhatsApp at 776-0440. And as always, we encourage you to let your voice be heard. Go to the Ministry of Education's website at moe.gov.tt and take part. Make sure that your suggestions are there in black and white to help carry this whole process forward. Just before we took the break, we looked at we were speaking about the policy and for student intervention, and what are some of the incremental things, those building blocks that you would want to see in such a policy. Dr. Skerritt, we start with you.
I'll defer to Ms. Bastian.
I would start by considering systems that we already have in place. And also, many times I wonder, as we in education seek to support our students and to make all levels of support available, there are systems that exist in other ministries, services that exist elsewhere. And if we can formalize access pathways to those services so that our beneficiaries, or our students who are beneficiaries of the education system and need those supports can access them, then it saves a lot of material resources as well as human resources. And one example I would give would be early intervention, opportunities for early intervention for our students, as well as access to allied health services for our students who need the different kinds of therapies, like that mother who was talking about having an autistic son, needing occupational therapy, physiotherapy, etc., and seeing if that can be accessed via Ministry of Health, if developmental assessments that are being done through developmental clinics in Ministry of Health, how can we build that into the policy so that we have formalized structures of referring, accessing service, and working together in a multi-sectoral kind of way to ensure that we have all the supports that our students need. So that's something that I would want the policy to consider.
And I like the fact that it seems as though you're talking about breaking down silos, because I think sometimes it's not realized that a problem here is almost like a stone in the water and there are ripple effects. So what about if we're talking about autism, that some parents have spoken about the fact that some of the autistic children have cores that are less strong. So they prop differently. How does that affect writing? How does that affect attention? How does that affect so many things?
Correct.
But in terms of the effects rather, you spoke a little bit about itinerant teachers, Dr. Skerritt. And do you think part of it is just having more such teachers possibly working on a part-time basis? So if there is an itinerant teacher, this is somebody who has gone to good school to develop whatever skill, proficiency, in addition to sharing meaning in the classroom. They have less classes to deal with, so they're able to focus more of their energy. Is that something that you think will work? Or how could we make that work?
Yeah, so the thing is, we have more and more students who are not succeeding. So it means if you have more students to care for, if you have one teacher who's assigned 8, 9, 10 different schools, then when they get to those schools, they likely will not be able to provide intervention on an individualized basis. And of course, that doesn't always mean that you deal with individual students, but they could be in small groups, but you're caring for their individual needs within those groups. But if the teacher is coming and she has 9 schools to deal with, then obviously there's going to be large groups. She may only be able to work with the teachers only and not even provide direct intervention for the students. So while itinerant teachers sometimes, or the itinerant model, where you have a teacher visiting schools rather than being resident there, and all the other support staff resident in the school because the school is outfitted with the needed resources. Sometimes for economy purposes, that's the way we have to go. But it has to be done in a way where we can still provide the students with the individualized attention. And I wanted us to piggyback on the comments that Ms. Bastian made. Another concept we associate with policy is the matter of standards. And oftentimes with intervention, many people have different orientations, different perspectives, paradigms, or different things we want to call those things. And some people become polarized. They figure, I like this, and this could work. But with a policy, it ensures that evidence-based practice is what you're using for your intervention. And evidence-based is not a static concept because we're continuing to do research. That's why we have universities that are leading the way in finding out what works within schools. We have teachers who are involved in research, so they go into their classrooms and they do action research. And so evidence-based practice can change. And there are teachers who hold on to the past. I know this work with me, but it may not be working with the students you have now, the students who are coming from a particular area and coming into school with certain affordances or certain limitations. And a policy is supposed to ensure that we have standards when it comes to what obtains as interventions.
And that seems to speak to professional learning, which is something that we will speak about a little later in the conversation. But how does a policy like this address the ecosystem of a student? Or how could it address the ecosystem of a student? Because a student may just be presenting with symptoms of something that is deep-rooted and pervasive within the entire situation that they're living in. And they're just coming to school and they're saying, okay, well, we need an intervention for this child. But how does that policy look beyond and see where that child is coming from and help to address situations like that?
Yeah, I think the underlying philosophies that will guide the policy should speak to that. So if we're taking an ecological systems approach to the way in which we are building out our intervention, then inherent in that approach would be to understand that while we are focusing, our primary client is the student, we want to ensure that at every level we are supporting every stakeholder that will impact the positive outcome that we want for the student. And therefore, we can't work with the student alone. It must be built into the policy that levels of intervention must support not only the student, but all the stakeholders that come together, inclusive of the communities within which these students live. And we must never forget that while we are seeking to offer intervention to students, parents, etc., and we're building that into the policy, that we must also recognize the role of the state and the macro level kinds of intervention and reviews that are necessary as well, and those must find themselves also into the policy.
So if you're looking to strengthen that chain, and we're not saying singling out any, actually we're going to single out a link a little bit. Mm-hmm. What would that policy do to help build the capacity in Student Support Services Division?
Yeah, well, one of the things, and I'm going straight back to what Dr. Skerrett was talking about, it comes down to staffing in many instances, because we know that our student population is not homogeneous. And so even if we have 5 students who are presenting with behavioral challenges, because of the ecosystem issues behind or underlying those behavioral challenges, they may require different levels of support from one or more staff member within SSSD. And so staffing must be addressed. I know that, for so many years, the special education department within student support have been indicating that staffing must be addressed. All levels of special educators, all levels, and the support staff that would be necessary. Because if we think that student issues are not homogeneous, then we need to think about disability issues and how heterogeneous that is. And so staffing, I would say, must be priority. when it comes to enhancing the work with student support services, but just to indicate that the model that student support services works on, that multidisciplinary approach, once it's properly staffed, it's an excellent approach and it will bear good fruit.
I love the way it seems as though you had that qualifier in parenthesis, once it is properly staffed. But preventing truancy, dropout, encouraging individuals to be in the system so that the system can work for them. What are some of those things you think would go a far way in helping that happen?
So, Ms. Bastian mentioned early intervention. That is critical. If you take a child and drop them in the ocean, you wait till they're drowning and they've gotten a good way down, getting them to come back up is going to be difficult. So wait until secondary school to bring systems to address truancy, to address dropout, to address failure is not going to work. In order to ensure students succeed, early intervention is critical. One area I'd just like to touch on has to do, for example, with deaf students. Early intervention is so critical for deaf students. So something as simple as universal screening to ensure that they capture all children who might have hearing difficulties is so important, because right away we can put things in place to ensure that they get access to that immersion environment, their parents can learn sign language, that you have an early intervention center where they can go and they can have models of language from members of the deaf community, and they can just be flooded, shared reading projects, different things you can put in place so that they have an equitable access to learning. So early intervention is critical.
And I'm imagining, as you're saying this, Dr. Skerritt, two sides or two juxtaposing two realities or possibilities. One, where it's not even as though the parent, the guardian, the teacher needs to wonder that, but screenings are happening so that you have that early intervention, as opposed to a child who has hearing difficulty and you have a parent or a teacher just thinking, that child don't listen. And how they actually treat that child, as opposed to saying, okay, well, there's a disability, there's an issue, this child needs help. But we continue with more. We are looking at strengthening the chain, enabling student success. We come back with more. Stay with us.
On Thursday, 1st July 2021, Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gatsby Dolly, Minister of Education, visited the Tranquility Government Primary School to ensure that all was ready for the 2021 secondary entrance assessment. 19,651 students nationwide wrote the examination under strict COVID-19 health protocols.
Schools are in a full state of preparedness for the exam. The children are out. They have all of their protocols in place for entry in terms of health and safety. The spacing in terms of how they've laid out the desks and the chairs, that is in order and in line with the health regulations. The children seem to be quite excited and happy to be out today to do their examination, the parents as well. And so, of course, we at the ministry are very happy to be able to have this exam happen today. It's been an uncertain time for our students. They have not been in school since March of 2020, and so we are very happy to be able to do that. I want to thank the staff at the ministry. SEA is a huge undertaking. It's a mammoth task, and in this environment, it was a lot more difficult, and I want to thank the staff for doing what was necessary to bring us to this point. And of course, the teachers, the parents, the students themselves for showing the resilience and ensuring that we can have the exam go off today. Well, the ministry's decision to reopen and how we reopen will be defined by our health circumstances, and so we take the guidance of the Ministry of Health. However, we have already started our discussions with stakeholders to bring together a guideline document such as we had for 2020-21, so that we can look at the possible reopening in terms of a physical sense, which is what we intend to get to. The Prime Minister has spoken very clearly on his hopes that this will happen. So we are working with that in mind to look at a guideline document that envisages a physical reopening in some sort, September.
This message brought to you by the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
The following feature on TNT Icons in Science is brought to you by Nehurst. Which TNT reproductive biologist gained international recognition for his seminal work on the structure and function of the placenta? Professor Emmanuel Amoruso's research on the placenta laid the foundation for the study of modern obstetrics and gynecology and advanced the field of endocrinology. To learn more about Professor Amoruso and other icons, log on to www.nehurst.gov.tt.
Welcome back. We are discussing enabling a successful student. We're doing so with Dr. Skerritt and Ms. Bastian. And we want to hear your voice. We want to hear what are some of the questions that you have, what are some of the suggestions. And once again, going back to the parent with the child who is autistic, we were talking about, one, a system is needed. Two, some of the things you'd like to see in that policy. But it is all well and good to have a policy. But what are some of those things that are needed to ensure that, okay, well, these things are established and we start to use them? Because like you said, Dr. Skerritt, it is easy sometimes to hold on to a position that you have had for a while, as opposed to saying, okay, well, that no longer works for you. So how do we start the ball rolling, get to the tipping point and say, okay, well, when we have the policy, these are some of the things that we need to establish it and make sure that it is used?
So this solution has to be continuous professional learning, and there are two aspects to that. Something I tell all my students at the university, they often complain I have them reading too much. That man does have us reading. But there's something about that. So teachers have to take your own responsibility as professionals, because teachers are professionals, to continue doing the research. So in all my courses, I require students to be going on the library's database and downloading the latest research and finding that evidence base to support anything I'm saying and anything that they need to be taking into their classrooms. And I tell them about my own experience when I was doing my bachelor's. I didn't just wait for the lecturers or the courses I was doing there to provide me with everything. For example, I recognized students were struggling with reading. I went to the Dyslexia Association, and I took all of their courses that they had there to work with students who are challenged with reading. You know, I went and learned sign language because I knew I was going to work with students with special needs, so I wanted to make sure if a student who's deaf comes into my class, I could work with them. That wasn't part of the curriculum. So we have that responsibility as professionals to continue learning. But at the same time, too, you're not going to get everything you need, and some of it could be costly. So from a governmental level, providing ongoing continuous professional learning is critical, ensuring that what we're doing arms the teachers with not just some aspect of what is new in terms of what we work, but ensuring that we call that, and there's a word I'm looking for, but an eclectic approach where you're not being polarized. You know, I like these strategies, I like these approaches, but I want to know as much as I could. So as the student comes before me, I can study, I'm going to sign, sorry. I can study these students and I can provide them with just what they need. But if I only know this, then if a student comes and this is what they need from me, then I'm not going to succeed.
And in terms of saying, okay, well, yes, initiative is one thing, but is there a space you see for turning anecdotal experiences into academic knowledge to help take it forward so it is more than cooler talk, is more than I just told my colleague and it may die on the vine there, but we can share experiences so that people who are facing a similar challenge can draw from that and say, okay, well, this worked for this person, they're able to cite the reference and use it towards their own ends.
Yes. I know in addition to some of the recommendations that Professor Delisle would have made when he was here earlier in the consultation process, there's also the need for us to share those kinds of learnings through conferences, you know, across the education sector, coming out of the universities where research is being pushed, but also across schools, across school districts. So it's about considering indigenous kinds of initiatives that will serve the purpose of getting the action moving forward out of the policy document. Other than that, we have a policy document that is pretty, and it will sit there and not get actioned out. So it's about taking action within our own spaces and talking to each other and moving that information forward.
Well, Ms. Bastian, that's all well and good, you know. But I have my children to deal with, I have the school children to deal with, and then I have these papers to correct. What are you telling me about putting conference together? When are we doing that?
No, I think it's an approach to the professional and the commitment of the professional, the teacher as a professional, that commitment. And so many of our teachers do have that commitment. We see them enrolling in courses, across universities. I know that within the ministry, the teacher development division, they are usually oversubscribed once they are providing opportunities for ongoing professional development. So it is there. It is just to promote a climate. I think it's to promote a national climate of the importance of sharing those kinds of anecdotal reports in a more structured kind of way. But the desire for sharing, it's there.
And I'll ask that question to you in a slightly different way, Dr. Skerritt, in terms of you said that you almost began signing and you immersed in it to the point where it's no longer a mental switch that you need to flick. How do other stakeholders get involved in something like that? So I'll use a specific example of signing. Where do people go to learn? How do people learn? What kind of sign language do people learn? Because there are different types, nuances, each with their own flavor. How do people do that?
Well, of course, the university is one stop that you have, because we have sign language courses there. In fact, the Faculty of Humanities and Education just introduced another co-curricular course on Introduction to Sign Language, and the Department of Modern Languages, they have a number of sign language courses. And then, of course, the interpreters who are here, I think that the organization they work for, they also provide Caribbean Sign Language interpreting. They provide sign language courses. But that's really such a good thing, because the more of us that can learn sign language, we have over 20,000 deaf people in Trinidad and Tobago, then we can be part of that opportunity for language immersion and support the development of children so they can be successful. I want to add one more thing. When Ms. Bastian was commenting just now, with regard to professional development, it's not just the teachers and the university, teachers are also researchers. Many of them are trying new things. So sometimes we think of evidence-based practice as just being what's written about in the journals. No. There are amazing teachers in our system who are interested in the development of their students, and they're trying things, and they're documenting, they're seeing what's working, and that practitioner experience is something that is invaluable and needs to be shared. So having in the system what we call communities of practice. Like, I remember when I was at the University of Tennessee, that's something we did, all of us in deaf education. Every month we'd select a couple of the newest articles, we'll find out what is working in your classrooms, and we'll come together and discuss it. And that's what teachers need to do. Communities of practice is part of that continuous professional learning experience.
And how do we keep those dreamers alive in the educators so that they're creative and able to say, okay, well, I'm trying this and I'm documenting it, as opposed to, well, they say to do it so, or using that pretty document that you would have spoken of.
I think it's also knowing that much of the support that they would require is available to them. And I think that's invaluable, because a lot of our teachers, they are trying new things and they want to try, but they also need the support from other professionals to maybe make some recommendations as to how they may not be seeing something, there may be a gap in service, etc., that is beyond the kind of initiative that the teacher may be able to take with their training. So it is important that the teachers also see that while we are willing to be creative and we are taking all this initiative, the kinds of supports that we require beyond the capacity that we have it's also available to the school and to our students. And I believe that makes the world of difference.
The world of difference. And we have a question: how important is a student monitoring system to enable student success? And I guess that also ties into the conversation that we were having earlier. What are some of those things that you monitor? Has that list of things that you should be monitoring increased?
Yeah.
That's important. The monitoring system is what will provide you with that feedback as to what the student is succeeding, what they're still struggling with, and that you can address that as quickly as possible. And it has to be not clogged in a system where people can't get the feedback when they need it, because these things are time-based. So you want to provide intervention as needed, because sometimes students make the progress and they're stuck in a system where they should have been out of that back into the regular classroom. They don't need this anymore, but they're still in there because they've been labeled sometimes. So with monitoring, it means we'll know what gains you're making, what you're still struggling with, what is intersecting to cause your problems. We fix this, we have something else. So the monitoring is critical, and getting the information to those who are doing the intervention in a timely manner.
Thank you so much, Dr. Skerritt. And I give you that question again, about a minute and a half. What is your view on that question?
I think that, well, it dovetails well with what Dr. Skerritt is saying. It's important that we track our students, and it's one of the ways in which we can work towards preventing some of the dropouts too that we are seeing in the system. We need to track our students, but not only to track performance and progress, but other things like their attendance, and even to track their engagement when they are present. So we have to focus on designing these kinds of monitoring systems that would allow us to track our students from the ECCE level straight into the other levels of schooling. And in tracking our students, then we are able to have a time, something that is very responsive within the time frame that is necessary to intervene. Because sometimes too, the intervention is available, but well beyond when it was initially necessary. And it becomes so much additional work to be able to get the gains that we need to get, as opposed to if we had intervened 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when the issue presented itself for the first time. So I think it's critical to track our students, not only academic progress, but attendance, engagement, and other kinds of indicators.
And this is something that I want to continue speaking about when we return, looking at how we can transition learners, also looking at it from a policy-driven approach. But we do that when we return. Stay with us.
The government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago has made a $50 million investment in the nation's future. The Ministry of Education, along with its public and private sector partners, distributed laptops to several primary and secondary schools in its drive to digitize education. The first module in this digitization plan was the Adopt a School program, part of government's public-private sector partnership, contextualized by Minister in the Ministry of Education, the Honorable Lisa Morris-Julian.
11 months ago, Minister Dr. Dolly and I walked into the ministry, and she made magic happen. Her first initiative of Adopt a School program was a roaring success. And now I'm very pleased to welcome our colleague, Minister Alison West, as we take part in the digitization of not just the ministry, but every single school in the country with government support. The future is now, and I'm pleased to be part of this program.
Senator the Honorable Alison West, Minister of Public Administration and Digital Transformation, explained their role.
There are all sorts of opportunities that this movement into the digital world allows us. The Ministry of Public Admin and its agencies, the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago and iGovTT, are committed to working with the ministry to ensure that the schools, the children and the teachers maximize this opportunity.
Education Minister Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gatsby-Dolly.
This act by our corporate sponsors and what's happening today brings our students and our focus clearly before the country, education has moved digital. We have had to do this from March 2020, and in that mode, it was emergency mode because we had to close schools to prevent the spread of the virus, and we knew that we had children facing examinations, and the only way we could connect with them was in the virtual world. And it's not just about the device, it's not just about the laptop. The Teacher Training Division, which has been instrumental in providing the training for our teachers so that they would use the tool well, for our students understanding how they use this tool. When we speak about the optimization of our school learning management system, when we speak about the procurement of ebooks, when we speak about dealing with the learning loss in math and grammar through the provision of a service online, when we speak about digitizing all of our school records, we speak about that not in the far distance, we speak about it now. All of us here stand together as a team working in the best interest of our children. And we are so happy to have come to this point and to say that we are here now, we have far to go, and we are about the business of transforming education, not by magic, but by hard and persistent work. And we understand what is needed, and we will do what we have to do.
This was a production of the Office of the Prime Minister, Communications.
The following feature on TNT Icons in Science is brought to you by Nehurst. Which highly regarded surgical oncologist, born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, is now the head of Howard University in the U.S.? Dr. Wayne Frederick, a top surgical oncologist and head of the Howard University in the U.S., rose to great heights despite living with the debilitating effects of sickle cell anemia. To learn more on Dr. Wayne Frederick and other icons, log on to www.nehurst.gov.tt.
Welcome back. We are continuing to see how we can enable student success and the monitoring system that we were talking about. Where does that go? How far does it go? Especially if we're looking to build communities of practice so that we can build on each other's strengths. And if there are failures, those failures happen and are spread across the system so that those mistakes aren't necessarily repeated. What are some of those things that you'd want to see in that monitoring system?
Well, if I could start digitizing the monitoring system to the extent possible, because I remember my first job in a primary school, I just wanted to teach. And I remember when people come in to collect data about this and about that, I used to get so mad. Don't come to my classroom. So digitizing that is important so that teachers need to focus on teaching and working with the students. And all the distractions, these things are important. The data is important, but find a way and digitize in such a way that parents can find out, my child come to school, they get an email right away. The teacher don't have to go and call them and lose quality time, because time on task for teachers is very important to ensure that you have that classroom management going on, but ensure that students are immersed in learning and every minute is spent in quality engagement with your students.
And sometimes you have this amount of time where you're building towards this moment that just sends that message home. And that is the moment for somebody coming in. And you can't do it the same way, because then the students see it coming from a mile away this time, as opposed to being there with you, being carried on that ride, on that journey. What are some of those things that you'd want to see in it, Ms. Bastian?
I would want to see the use of the data that is collected in the school itself. So I find, even with our staff, I was talking to my staff just last week about that. We collect data and we send as a part of an accountability system. So we will send, to head office, etc. But it is important that while we send this data, we also use that data as a part of the feedback loop that informs the work that we are doing in real time with our students as well. It's only when we do that kind of thing, then we can have the effective kinds of communities of practice that we are looking to promote best practices via, etc. So yes, I'm all for the digitizing, etc. But I think coupled with that must come the actual use of the data and not just exporting of that data and continuing to do things as we are most comfortable.
So take me through the process of getting the data, contextualizing it, and then using it, implementing, taking it forward. Who are some of the players in that in terms of the collection, the collation, saying, okay, well, these things are saying that possibly we should do this. So developing a policy or that set of steps towards it and then seeing that set of steps through.
Well, the best way would be to have a multidisciplinary approach to that. Yeah, we can't expect that the teacher alone is the one collecting all of this data, analyzing all of this data, no. And then remember, everybody's coming with a particular lens based on your area of training. So we will benefit best if all the support systems that we have been talking about that we need our students to benefit from, if these professionals are able to extend their various professional lens into what is happening with these children that we are tracking, and then be able to collect these kinds of data, bring them together in a systematic way, do that analysis, and then provide that kind of feedback. Not only the teacher would be receiving the feedback and implementing it, but the other support professionals who are working with these students, supporting them, will also be using that data. So it calls for this multidisciplinary approach, and it goes back to issues of course, availability of the different levels of staffing, accessing external support that may already exist, etc. So that's the ideal circumstance, of course.
And what kind of time frame are we looking at? Because Dr. Skerritt, I would hate for a lovely crafted answer or way of dealing, having an intervention be dropped into my lap for a student who was in my class last year.
Yes, you're right. The timing is important. And that's why I think for teachers, teacher education is important. And in teacher education, courses and assessment. So while Ms. Bastian mentioned, we'll have, for example, the clinical psychologist, you'll have the guidance counselor, the educational psychologist. Their role is becoming more and more critical. But teachers need to have a battery of assessment courses because they also need to understand that data to quickly identify what needs to be done because they're the first port of call for working with the students. So it's important for all teacher education programs to have quality courses in assessment, being able to look at the data and know how to read that information and know what to do with it. And of course, when things are a little bit more challenged, then you quickly want to get that multidisciplinary team, either at the school level or outside in student support services, to bring all of those perspectives to working with a child.
And in terms of striving for effectiveness, I'd like you both to put on your rose-tinted glasses or your rose-tinted lenses. And what are some of those factors that you say, okay, well, yes, this is here, in terms of checking off the list for a healthy school environment that would work towards enabling student success?
Well, definitely. Safety, you know, recently we had in 2016 the PEARLS data on reading, and I was interested in the fact that bullying in school is one of the concepts or constructs associated with poor achievement in reading. So the safety of our schools is important, and of course even for males, sometimes when I was in school, they used to call me a walking dictionary, and I hated that. And people probably assume that you're less masculine because you loved reading. That hasn't changed. Young men don't want to be seen reading because there's this notion that you're not as masculine if you're spending all this time with books. So dealing with the matter of safe schools in terms of ensuring that there's no bullying of any kind. Having teachers very quick to address that and working positively to ensure that we develop those skills in students, those soft skills, but learn to respect each other, respect people's differences. I think those things are very, very important.
And we remind you that you can send us questions or comments via WhatsApp 776-0440. Give us a call live to join the conversation at 622-4010. And we are here with a reading specialist and so much more, Dr. Paulson Skerritt, as well as guidance officer, and so much more, advocate for inclusivity and other things, Ms. Mary Bastian. And even before I throw that question to you with your rose-colored lenses on, we have a question via WhatsApp. To what extent will individual education plans contribute to enabling student success?
Yes, I believe that IEPs are an essential part of the what is necessary to enable student success, especially because it is a part of that set of tools that would be used with our students who would have been identified as having specific issues, in many instances benefited from a psychoeducational assessment and other kinds of assessments with recommendations coming out, and having the benefit of different professionals being able to sit and develop these individual education plans, and of course then working towards implementing them. So I believe that IEPs are critical within these circumstances. I would also open to...
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I remember when we started PEDIC, and even our vision of opening the reading clinic, one of the first things Professor Delisle worked on with us was to set up an individualized education plan, because that way you can identify all of the things that the students are struggling with, all their strengths, and now you can have you can plan and then put the plan in place. Yeah. And it's not just a willy-willy. Yeah. There's a new word I learned the other day, something of the wisp. I'm not remembering it now. Will of the wisp. That you're not sure if you're going to actually reach this goal. Is it attainable? But with the IEP, your plans, you can check them off. If you accomplish this, and you can see the child succeeding because you're following that plan.
And what you're saying, and a WhatsApp question, I think they're also tied together. You said of your initiative, there were these modular courses, short courses that you went, and they helped build your capacity for people, individuals that you knew that you were going to engage with. We have a question: has our education system transitioned to a modular and more authentic approach to teaching, learning, and assessment? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So in terms of that, and possibly is it that they're also asking whether or not we should, and those courses that you would have done for, say, okay, we're dealing with somebody with dyslexia, dealing with somebody who has another issue, dealing with someone who is hearing impaired. Possibly they're asking, and I say possibly because I don't want necessarily to put words in their mouth. In terms of designing a plan, is it that we are able to say, okay, well, these are the things that we want to tackle, these are the things that we want to encompass in what it is we're doing, so we're working towards that?
I'm thinking modular and authentic seem to be juxtaposed, because when I'm teaching, I like a thematic approach. I'm not into being modular, because that allows me to make a lot of connections to real life and application. So authentic learning, yes. Authentic assessment, your continuous assessment and your formative assessment, that allows you to really see our students applying what they learn. Can they make applications to real life? That is important. But to be modular means that I could be taking your science, and for example, we talk about STEM education, where they're trying to connect science, technology, math, etc. That's the way to go. And same thing with reading. I can bring the science, bring the social studies, and that allows me to have the students experience authentic learning, where they're not just learning skills that will allow them to make a living, but more importantly, I think they learn how to live. They learn all those important interpersonal, intrapersonal, all those problem solving, creative thinking, and dealing with personalities and feelings, and wow. So authentic, I'm not too sure about the modular part.
Okay, and even before I throw it to you, Ms. Bastian, and even past STEM, now hearing about STEAM, so the A is for art, and that also brings into play how it is we deal with ourselves, how it is we deal with persons, how we develop those skills that allow us to live in community. because many times that person would be the person for the job if I could send them, if they could work with the group, if they would contribute to the group as opposed to detracting. Even though you have this skill set, you're not able to function with your teammates, with your peers, with your colleagues. So what are some of those things you'd want to see in terms of defining that healthy school environment in the context of working towards student success, Ms. Bastian?
In guidance and counseling, we talk about the importance of teaching our children to learn, but also teaching them to live and teaching them to be able to transition into the world of work. And so it is important that the school climate is so set up that those three areas can be worked on consistently over time. But also important for me would be to see opportunities for student leadership encouraged within a school environment. Many times we notice that some of the students who may present with some behavioral challenges, they also tend to have excellent leadership capacity. And sometimes they are bored, and so they get themselves into trouble. And so if schools are able to create spaces where the leadership skills and capacity of these students are encouraged, even in students who we may not see anything, but we create the opportunity over time, I think that is important, and it will augur well for a positive school climate. So that's important. Opportunities for student leadership, etc. And an environment where I come back to the importance that students feel that they have a voice. But with this voice, of course, responsibility. You know, we talk about students' rights, but we must accompany it with responsibility. But yes, a positive school climate for me means that the students' opinions are valued, their rights are respected, but they also are able to respect each other and their educators, and they hold that responsibility there. So those things would be a perfect kind of environment for me with my rose-colored glasses.
And I smile in one of the things you're saying, and I'm remembering a former principal recounting in terms along those lines of looking at the seed and seeing the fruit. So even past the tree is already bearing, and having a large amount of the cohort of prefects and students, individuals in authority, those who otherwise left to their own devices might be involved in less than ideal circumstances. I mean, part of it is that they already know a lot of the tricks and they're able to nip it in the bud. But also it's just they're so bored in the system and they have not been challenged to be their better selves. Definitely something to think about. And that kind of engagement, giving of responsibility, how does that work from where you sit, Dr. Skerritt?
Well, students, oftentimes when we used to define student success, we thought of it in terms of grades, we thought of it in terms of a number of things that didn't involve the voice of the student. What do even students perceive is my end goal? How do I know I'm successful? And it's really important to empower our students to be able to determine what will make me successful, because they have their aspirations, they know where they're coming from. So I think that's a very important factor.
And important too is the fact that we look at time, but at the same time we take our final break in this our final day. And when we return, we have closing arguments from both you, Ms. Bastian, and you, Dr. Skerritt. Stay with us.
Our world has changed, and with every day, our children's future takes on a different shape. How do we prepare them for a future that is uncertain? One where their education, in whatever form it takes, is their only passport for the future. This is the focus of the National Education Policy for the period 2022 to 2027. We all have a stake in our children's tomorrow, so we must all have a voice today. The Ministry of Education began this conversation with the nation in November 2020, when we said it takes a village. We listened to you, the members of the village, and drafted 8 areas of focus for education for the next 5 years. These are TVET revitalization, curriculum reform, digital transformation, Education Act, equity in quality education, transition of learners, enabling student success and human resource development. We then continued the conversation in December 2021. We consulted with key stakeholders in the education ecosystem, including the Representative Union for Teachers, parent groups, school boards, and tertiary level institutions. Having received and incorporated their recommendations, the Ministry of Education is coming back to the national population for their views and opinions on the draft concept note for the National Policy on Education 2022 to 2027. This is your opportunity to join the conversation. Let your voice be heard. There are 4 ways for you to comment. Visit moe.gov.tt for the draft concept note. Then you can share your views on moe.gov.tt. Call in during the televised broadcast. WhatsApp your views to 776-0440 or comment on the ministry's social media pages during the live stream. Visit the Ministry of Education social media pages for further details. Education is a passport for the future, and share your views and help our children take flight.
The following feature on TNT Icons in Science is brought to you by Nehurst. Which TNT aeronautical engineer and inventor designed military aircraft that gave the Allied forces air superiority in World War II? Conrad Lowe, who attended Queen's Royal College and later MIT, was the lead designer of the famous fighter planes, the F-4U Corsair, the F-7U Cutlass, and the F-8U Crusader. To learn more on Conrad Lowe and other local icons, log on to www.nehurst.gov.tt.
Welcome back. We are here, the final stages of this evening, the 8th installment of the Education Policy or Consultation on Education Policy, and it is time for closing statements. So I'm wondering, who will I have first in terms of saying, okay, well, wrapping up the argument, these are things we want to see, these are the people we need to do it, or any other thoughts in general?
I can begin. For my closing remarks, I would just want us, as we move towards crafting the policy, to remember that we are working towards enabling success with students who exist on a continuum, from students who are gifted to students who are profoundly disabled. And we need to consider the construction of our policy document within a human rights framework, recognizing that since education is a human right, then no matter the ability or potential of a student, a policy document must ensure that there are opportunities for all our students, gifted, straight to profoundly disabled, to access this human right that is education.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scaron.
And I really want to emphasize the importance of our focusing on those 2 big goals. We need to provide our students with the knowledge and skills to make a living, but we're continuing to grapple with these wicked problems, and it's making life not worth living almost. We need to deal with that by getting our students to learn how to live, how to contribute to working with people, how to be good humans, so that we can make a difference in the world. And good teachers are able to do that while they're teaching the skills and the knowledge related to science and social studies, physics, etc., by making those real-world applications, by taking opportunities to get children to think and critically analyze things. They can develop all those soft skills that will truly lead to a successful student.
And in terms of those successful students, when I ask the question, who do you cater to, who's your target grouping, and I realized that it was so much wider. How do people contact persons in your position, persons, guidance officers, or the SSD?
SSSD, yes. So they can reach SSSD at 622-2181, extension 1035, extension 1036, straight to extension 1038. they would be able to reach one of the disciplines: guidance and counseling, social work, the diagnostic and assessment unit, or intervention unit, or special education. And they can request whatever kinds of support they may need, and they can also access us at the levels of the education districts, the 7 education districts.
All right, and I think I want to throw that question to you as well, please, Dr. Scarrett.
Well, first at the University at PEDIC, I don't want to give phone numbers because that's a lot of cognitive load. So PEDIC at sta.uwi.edu, and for any parent struggling, the children struggling with reading, just contact us at PEDIC Reading Clinic at sta.uwi.edu, and we're ready to assist.
And a last comment to parents in terms of working to ensure, enable the students, the persons in their charge's success. What would that be, Ms. Bastian?
It would be that we know that you are doing your best. We know that you want the best for your child, and we are here to support you. The Student Support Services Division of the Ministry of Education, please reach out to us and let us work together and partner with you to make sure that your child is able to attain to their fullest potential.
And with that, we want to thank you so much, Ms. Mary Bastian and Dr. Paulson Skerritt, as well as each panel member of the 8 episodes. And this has been the consultation on the education policy 2021 to 2022 Education Passport to the Future. I'm DK Roster, and it has been my pleasure to help facilitate this exercise, and we want to thank you for tuning in and contributing. Remember, you can still let your voice be heard by going on to the ministry's website at moe.gov.tt, that's moe.gov.tt, and continue commenting on the social pages. Thank you once more for joining us in an effort to secure the educational future of our nation. Good night.